right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 4:30, so we will go ahead and call to order the Planning Commission agenda session for Monday, July 25th's meeting. We do have a few items on the consent agenda. First is the approval of the minutes from the July 11th Planning Commission meeting. The second item is VAR 2022-0038. This is a variance submitted by Alan Reed and Associates for property located at 4863 South Darrell Road. The property is in the Fayetteville planning area and contains approximately 155.36 acres. The request is for a variance to street frontage requirements due to a proposed lot split. And Gretchen Harrison is the planner on this one, so I'll let her introduce the item to you.
So as Ms. Foster said, the property for this request is located south of Fayetteville in Washington County, about halfway between Drakefield to the west and Lake Wilson to the east. The property contains roughly 201 acres and 3 parcels. The applicant is proposing to split the property into 7 lots. 2 of those lots, which are on the easternmost side of the property, do not have direct frontage onto a public street. So they are requesting to vary from the minimum lot width standards for Washington County. Staff is supportive of the request. There is a private drive that extends to those lots, and the applicant is proposing to overlay a 30-foot access easement over that drive to provide access for those lots to the right-of-way. So staff is supportive of the request with conditions. We did not hear any public comment on the item, but I could stand for any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you. Does the commission agree for this to be on the consent agenda, or do you have any questions at this time? All right, hearing none, we will move along. The next item for consideration on consent is LSD 2022-022. This is a large-scale development submitted by Engineering Services Incorporated for property located at 2801 West McMillan Drive. The property is zoned P1 institutional and contains approximately 8.91 acres. The request is for a 15,100 square foot building expansion, and Ryan Umberger is the planner on this one, so I will let him introduce the item.
Thank you, Jesse. This property is in West Fayetteville, southeast of the interchange between Weddington and I-49. The property is zoned P1 institutional, and it contains 12.13 acres. These properties are part of the McMillan States Commercial Subdivision, and in the staff report, I just kind of go into some background, but I think to give you the shortened version of it, the current development, Cross Church, came through in September of 2016 for approximately 72,000 square foot church and 608 parking spaces. The applicant is requesting large scale development approval to develop the subject property with a 15,100 square foot addition to the existing church facility, and they are not requesting any variances. I did want to acknowledge staff is recommending approval of the large scale development on the consent agenda. Though I did want to just acknowledge a comment that we received from the engineering division that they are working with the applicant to address to make sure that their study points are accurately reflecting those study points that they should be to meet our drainage standards. Our engineering staff did say they were comfortable recommending approval of the project at this stage, just understanding that those drainage comments would need to get worked out prior to grading permit submittal. So we are recommending that it get approved on the consent agenda, and we'll likely be adding just an extra condition specifying that they meet all of our drainage standards prior to grading permit. And we have not received any public comment on this item, so I can stand for any questions that you have.
Does the commission have any questions? Commissioner Garlock.
Yes, thank you. This is not expanding any of the footprint that's already in place. It's just going to be over the parking lot and is going to be compliant with the current drainage manual. Is that correct?
It is not going to be expanding on the existing parking lot. So there's a space that you'll see just kind of on the south and west, that southwest corner of the site that is being indicated with the mouse on the screen there. Basically, that's where the addition is proposed to go in. It's on some green space that immediately adjoins the church. And then I would have to defer to engineering if their staff is available to speak to if they're meeting our drainage criteria manual or any questions about that.
I think that's important. I don't mind it being on consent as long as there's a piece in there that they do meet the current drainage manual and all specifications by engineering.
I'd like to
Yeah, I
defer.
can jump in and speak to that really quick. I think we're comfortable moving it forward considering the size of the site and the options that they have to relocate and meet those standards. We did have some concerns previously because their study points were not specifically at the property line, which we typically require. And so it's definitely something I've been in contact with the engineer on this project, and we're comfortable with it being approved. And obviously, they still have to go through a grading permit review, and we check for compliance at that point too. So this is definitely not the last stage before they get their permit.
Good. I was just concerned, didn't get a chance to go through it completely, but wanted to express concerns about that, and that you're comfortable with it, and I am comfortable with it too. Thank you.
Of course.
So is the commission generally okay with this being on consent, or would they prefer it be removed? Hearing nothing and seeing a nod from Porter Winston, we'll keep it on the consent agenda. All right, thank you. With that, we will move on to our next item. We have one item of old business. This is RZN 2022-027. This is a rezoning submitted by Bowerbird for property located at 603 North Walnut Avenue. The property is zoned RSF4, residential single-family, 4 units per acre, and contains approximately 0.69 acres. The request is to rezone the property to RSF8, residential single-family, 8 units per acre. I believe the applicant requested to table this item until August 8th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting, but I will let Ryan Umberger give a full update.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, so we did receive notification just a little bit earlier this afternoon that the applicant is requesting to table the item until the next scheduled Planning Commission meeting. Since the last Planning Commission meeting, it was tabled basically so that Alan Q would have time to comment on the request. I've had a couple calls and a couple emails out to Alan just to confirm that he'll be available to speak to it. And as you'll be seeing on the agenda, he has a couple other items that he'll be attending for. But in this case, the applicant is requesting the table just to get some additional information on what they can do under their current zoning entitlements. Our recommendation is the same. It is a recommendation to deny the rezoning, and I can stand for any questions that you've got.
Does the commission have any questions about that? Okay, hearing none, seeing no hands, we will move on then to our first item of new business. This is VAR 2022. The next two items are actually also Alan Pugh's items, so he will be able to speak more specifically to them. I can give general overviews and take questions if you have them. So we have VAR 2022-0025. This is a variance submitted by We Build Decks for property located at 1679 South Cooper's Cove. The property is zoned RSF4, residential single family, 4 units per acre, and contains approximately 0.31 acres. The request is for a variance allowing at least 12 feet closer to the stream side. So this is a stream side protection variance request. So the property does have some history to that ordinance already. The site was granted a streamside protection variance back in, I believe, 2017 by this commission. Essentially, the subdivision was platted before the ordinance came to be. The ordinance came to be, and so it would have essentially rendered this entire kind of site unbuildable. So they were granted a streamside variance back in 2017. At this time, the applicant is now coming forward and would like to build a deck on the property that would start to encroach a little bit more into the streamside zone. Staff is actually recommending in support of the request with some added conditions, again, that Alan can certainly speak to further if needed. This would be eligible for consent if the commission was interested, but we have not received any public comment on it, and I can answer any questions you might have.
My inclination on this is not to put it on consent, just because, um, I, just because it's the streamside protection ordinance, and I feel like we need to discuss it each time in order to, define that this isn't a slippery slope situation, or that, and just to clarify that this is an individual situation, that we talked about and discussed.
Okay, we will keep it off consent. Does anybody else have any questions about this that I can relay to Mr. Pugh? Okay, hearing none, we will move on then to the next item is VAR 2022-040. This is a variance submitted by Flowers Consulting for property located at 245 East Rock Street. The property is zoned RMF 24, residential multifamily, 24 units per acre, and contains approximately 0.36 acres. This is a request for a flood zone variance. So you're probably familiar with this site. A recent variance request came through a few months ago for a streamside protection zone variance as well. It was ultimately granted as long as the proposal did not encroach into the waterside zone. So that's sort of a summary about some previous history on the site. This is a different request. They are requesting a variance to having to provide a flood study. So there is a requirement associated with this development type that the applicant would be required to show a flood study, required to perform a flood study. In this particular instance, the boundaries, a flood study was recently undertaken by FEMA, and so the applicant is essentially requesting to use that information to support their development plans. Staff is recommending in support of this one as well. Again, Mr. Pugh is going to be able to speak much more eloquently on the subject than I can. I can take any questions that you might have for him. He is recommending in favor of the request, and we have not received any public comment to date.
So what I understood you to say in reading here, they're not asking to do something in the FEMA thing, they're just asking to be able to use the FEMA study rather than doing their own.
Correct.
Okay.
That is accurate summary. This could also go on consent if the commission was interested, or it can stay off. That is also permitted.
I think this is a good one for consent, even though it is sort of associated with that streamside protection ordinance.
I think this is one to be consistent if we are going to go to that. This is not into the waterside zone. The two zones that are pertinent, I think we need to have conformity. And if we're going to talk about one, I think we need to talk about the other one, personal opinion. So we do have conformity moving forward. The other one's just putting a deck there. This one's looks like is putting a actual building in that waterside zone.
So as a reminder, this is not a streamside protection variance. That variance was heard a few months ago by the commission. This is a variance to a flood zone requirement.
It's a little bit tighter than that, and so really it's just a question of, can they swap out one study for doing their own study? So that's where I feel like I'm okay with it on consent.
Commissioner Garlick, did I answer your question?
Yes, and Alan Pugh is fine with this?
He is recommending in favor, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Commissioner Brink, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so does our streamside ordinance areas typically follow the FEMA flood zones?
So the streamside protection ordinance, I mean, there's probably a very common overlap, but the streamside protection ordinance basically covers a certain dimension from the location of the stream. I believe it's 25 feet from the stream itself, and then in addition is the waterside zone, and then another 25 feet is where the streamside protection zone begins. So I think there is often a lot of overlap between those two things, as you would probably imagine, but I don't think they are typically one and the same. So the streamside protection zone basically just it's basically an additional setback that a building would have to follow from the location of a stream, whereas the floodplain or flood zones would probably follow more natural contours of an area. I'm definitely speaking outside of my general knowledge of information though, so I would defer to Mr. Pugh if you have more questions about that.
Sure. I guess in my mind, if it's kind of following the same areas and kind of the same, I guess I may be using the wrong terminology, but the same drainage area, I would feel comfortable letting the applicant use that study, and if used in favor, then I would be fine with putting it on consent.
Mr. Pugh is in favor of the request, so I'm generally hearing that I think the commission is in favor of moving this one to the consent agenda.
Yes,
I am.
and
Okay, sounds like it. So I think we will move VAR 2022-040 to consent. You can always request to remove it on Monday if you so choose, but we will place it on consent. All right, any other further questions? Commissioner Brink, did you still have another question? I noticed your hand is still raised.
That was it.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, next up we have ADM 2022-038. This is an administrative item submitted by Engineering Services for property located at 2200 South Industrial Drive. The properties are zoned I2 General Industrial and contains approximately 12.71 acres. The request is to amend LSD 2022-04 by removing a requirement for master street plan improvements which involve the sidewalk in vicinity of a tree grove along Pump Station Road. So the site in question is likely familiar to the commission. This large-scale development came before you all back, I believe, in February. Along with that large-scale development, the applicant did request a variance. So this map is not 100% correct. That sort of postage stamp square in the northeast corner is also part of the site. I'll have to double check the legal description there why that's not getting picked up. But that is actually the area in question of this whole conversation. So the applicant had requested a variance with their large-scale development to not improve Pump Station Road to the typical master street plan requirements. Planning Commission ultimately denied that variance request and indicated a condition of approval that the applicant do, in fact, build a 6-foot sidewalk along East Pump Station Road. The applicant has come back basically with another request to amend that condition of approval. There is a large grove of pine trees that they are hoping to avoid, and some grading concerns on the site that they would like the commission to reconsider. So with this particular instance, staff did evaluate this request, and we are still recommending in denial. Staff does have somewhat of a split opinion on the matter, but that is ultimately where staff's recommendation is at this time. So with this proposal, there's a large grove of pine trees that is currently within city right-of-way and within a water and sewer easement, and that's basically the trees in question. And so staff is basically finding that since those trees, even though they are very large, very old, and somewhat significant, would not really be guaranteed survival even if this amendment were to be approved, given that improvements could be made to a water line that's currently running under that location and just its existence in the right-of-way. So with that, we are recommending in denial of the request. However, we did want to offer the commission an opportunity to consider a possible rerouting of the sidewalk rather than it be through the right-of-way. We were suggesting that one potential option would be to route the sidewalk farther south to be within the general utility easement, which in the instance that the water line did have to be maintained or rebuilt, the trees would have already been removed once for the sidewalk, and so it may actually help preserve some of the trees that are within the right-of-way. We ultimately are recommending denial, but just wanted to offer that point of consideration should the commission choose to approve the variant or the amendment. That was a bit long-winded. I apologize. We have not received any public comment on the item, and I can answer any questions that you might have.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
So I'm kind of wondering, obviously these trees didn't grow since the last time we looked at this. This is a process. It seems like this information should have been included earlier. Do we know why it
So that was what staff's assignment to the applicant was. We did recommend to them that if there was new information, we could bring it to the planning commission to consider. This is what they provided, so our job was to bring it to the commission to consider.
Okay.
So if it is up to the, ultimately if the commission doesn't feel as though the site considerations have changed, then that could also be the determination also.
Then my second question is, I understand the recommendation to move it further south, but I'm looking at the photos and I know it's less than ideal, but is there a reason not to potentially put it immediately at the back of the curb?
So that was looked at by engineering also. I guess the amount of fill that would be needed to keep the sidewalk flat would still probably have a pretty cascading negative effect on the grading to the trees. So Josh Boccaccio could speak more directly to that construction consideration, but that was looked at as an option as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Is there an exhibit showing where staff recommends moving the sidewalk to?
We did not provide one with the report. I think because it was sort of offered up as a suggestion, I think we could probably further hammer that down if the commission did want to consider it. I think the ideal location would probably, or one recommended location would be just in line with the existing water line that's shown, I think, on the exhibit with the trees on it. You can see the water line there.
Jesse, if I may, I think engineering's position on this is that sidewalk connection along that section of pump station is a pretty critical piece of infrastructure. Sidewalk along the north side where Combe Cemetery is will likely never be installed, just due to the fact that that's a cemetery and won't necessarily be developed unless something extraordinary happens. And so I think what we're recommending is just giving the applicant some latitude on the exact location of the trail, instead of having to put it at the right of way or in the right of way and filling 2% above the curb, following existing grade, meeting ADA, 2% cross slope, and then working around that existing water line and the utility easement, because as you all know, those pipelines don't last forever. They have a lifespan. So in the future, trees will be removed whenever that maintenance takes place. And so our idea and our suggestion was to put that sidewalk in a location where additional trees wouldn't have to be removed when that water line needs maintenance or an extension.
Any further questions?
So just so I understand, is it possible for them to put it between the line that says utility easement and the line to outside of that from the center line or the right of way, where it would largely be on the backside of the trees? Is that an okay place to put it?
I think ultimately it's the commission's determination on the exact location. I think, again, just remembering that staff's recommendation is to deny and to have the sidewalk built according to the typical master street plan standards. But if the commission would want to shift it, I think engineering would likely want to weigh in on how much fill or would be needed to keep it at that 2%, whether that location would minimize the disturbance to the trees. Ultimately, staff does want to just recognize as well that these trees are not, they are significant, and it is an asset, but unfortunately with their location in the right of way and the utility easement, they are not destined to stay without any level of further protection. So,
Can I ask one other question?
yes.
Because I've seen this happen before. If we deny and say, no, you need to put it here where it's expected, then will they, for whatever reason, come in and say in order to do what they need to do, they just cut down every tree that's there?
They could do that. So again, the trees are not protected in their current location.
Thank you.
And I'd like to comment on putting the trail at the very back of that grove. We do want to maintain the sidewalk as close to the right of way as possible, just to have a direct connection, as direct as possible along the street. And so we're not, jogging 60 feet back from sidewalk and then going back up once you get around the trees. So I think our position would be recommendation if the commission wants to adjust the location of the sidewalk would be to either follow the water line where it's at or some other configuration within that utility easement as close to the right of way as possible.
Is it permissible for the sidewalk to meander?
I think we would want like I said, a direct connection, depending on location of those trees. It's definitely something that we could work with the applicant on. With the exhibit not provided and the actual impact of the trees, if that sidewalk was moved, it might be good for the commission to leave that option in, but make sure that that connection is made as directly as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Anything further? We will keep this one off consent. Next, we have VAR 2022-039. This is a variance submitted by Jorgensen and Associates for property located at 2750 East Joyce Boulevard. The property is zoned C1 Neighborhood Commercial and contains approximately 1.28 acres. The request is for a variance to allow parking spaces, and Gretchen Harrison is the planner on this one.
Yes, so the property for this request is located in northeast Fayetteville, approximately 600 feet west of the intersection of Joyce Boulevard and Crossover Road. The property is currently undeveloped, though MANA, the Medical Associates of Northwest Arkansas, are looking to develop the site with a new chiropractic clinic. Their current location is just west of the site on the west side of Millennium Drive. So they're looking to redevelop the site and expand just their square footage and capacity. So they are requesting, as part of this variance, to vary from the maximum number of parking spaces that would be permitted for the new building. Medical offices are limited to a ratio of 1 space per every 250 square feet of gross floor area. They are proposing to develop a 9,000 square foot building, which would give them a maximum allowance of 36 parking spaces. The applicant has offered to utilize all of the by right increases, as well as those for LED techniques and providing additional tree plantings, which would bring their total allowed to 47. At their current location, they have 65 parking spaces available, and they are sharing that site with 2 other tenants, and they see an average of 64 patients or staff at a time. So they are currently undersupplied with parking at their current location, and they've been using this site as overflow parking and kind of informal off-site parking for their business. As proposed, they are requesting 87 spaces, and that matches their counts for the number of patients and staff that they expect to have on site at any given time. That would be a variance of 40 spaces over what is permitted with all those additional allowances. And considering the request, staff determined that they are meeting the letter of the ordinance in this instance, even though they are providing more than double almost what they would typically be allowed. Based on the figures provided, they are proposing the minimum necessary to make reasonable use of the site for the business. And they are meeting the intent of the code by utilizing all of those increases and by not oversupplying parking and providing enough space to accommodate all spaces needed on site. So we did not receive any public comment on this item, and we are recommending approval of it with some conditions. And we are recommending that this be left off consent just because there's some calculations and things that I figured you might have questions about, but I'd be happy to answer anything that you may have questions about.
in my experience, businesses have a much better sense of what they need parking wise than we do. And if this is could go on consent, I would propose that we do.
I agree with that to a certain extent, but I do have the question, which I didn't hear you mention between LID and everything else. Is there any opportunity for them to share parking with anybody else, the multifamily or whatever? It just seems like we're just creating a lot more paved area when we're dealing with stormwater and everything else and heat, et cetera. Is shared parking an option at all, or was that explored, or is that not a potential option?
Shared parking wasn't an option that was explored. They are offering cross-access with that development to the east, but it looks like that building right now currently is parking on this site, and a gravel lot on it. So there are opportunities just within that subdivision, but it was not something I evaluated fully.
And they're vacating their property across the street?
Correct.
So they would no longer have access to any of that parking?
Does the commission want to keep this off the consent?
Seems like a foreign type of effect to make it fit. I don't know whether I would intend to think that they're complying with the letter or the intent of the ordinance, but you know, I guess I don't really like seeing parking. I agree that businesses have a better handle on the number of spaces that they're going to need, and it's just unfortunate to go that far out for parking spaces.
I mean, that's kind of my concern too, that they're gonna be using this 8 hours a day and the other 16 hours a day or whatever, it's just gonna be an empty parking lot sitting there, but,
Welcome to Fayetteville.
yeah, it just seems like it's a screaming opportunity to pursue shared parking to me, but it's kind of hard to do that on the fly from the podium.
We can certainly leave it off consent if the commission wants to discuss it further on Monday.
I think that'd be a good idea.
Okay, we will leave it where it is. Thank you. Next up, we have VAR 2022-042. This is a variance submitted by Olson Engineering for property located at 3788 North Gregg Avenue. The property is zoned UT Urban Thoroughfare and contains approximately 17.32 acres. The request is for a variance from UDC Chapter 17204C4, Parking Lot Design Standards, and Chapter 177.04D2, Site Development and Parking Lot Landscape Standards. And Ryan Umberger is the planner on this one.
Thank you. These properties are in North Fayetteville. They're at the northeast corner of Gregg Avenue and Van Ash Drive. This property is a greenfield site that encompasses approximately 17.32 acres, and it's zoned UT Urban Thoroughfare. There's a little tree canopy on site, apart from a band of trees that forms the north and east, that follows the north and east property lines. And there is a somewhat of a depression near the southeast corner of the property. The applicant has requested 3 variances from Unified Development Code 17204C4. That's our parking lot design standards. Specifically, it's a requirement that all parking and drive aisles are located at the side or rear of structures and not located in a build-to zone. And then they're also asking for 1 variance from 17704D2. And that variance is to waive a requirement for a 15-foot landscape area on lot 20A. We did include an exhibit just because they speak to, you know, specific lots in the request letter, and so just wanted to indicate where each of the lots where the variances would apply are located. We are recommending denial of the 3 variances to 17204C4. That's the parking lot design standards, and we are recommending approval of the variance to 17704D2. We haven't received any public comments specifically to the variance requests, and these variance requests did come in before a development application at this site. But we did receive some public comment that spoke to drainage in the area generally. They just requested that the commission be mindful of some issues that they noticed on their property to the south. So we are recommending partial approval of this variance, and I can stand for any questions that you have.
Any questions from the commission on that? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to our next item is PPL 2022-04. This is a preliminary plat submitted by Jorgensen and Associates for a property located southwest of West Persimmon and North Rupel Road. The property is zoned CS Community Services and RA Residential Agricultural and contains 35.20 acres. The request is for a preliminary plat of 54 residential lots and 1 lot for detention and community space. The site in question before you today is just southwest of Owl Creek School. The applicant is proposing a residential subdivision on this lot. The property did receive its zoning entitlement originally in 2015. It is split zone CS and RA. They did come back through in early 2022 with a request to expand some of the CS area and swap out some of the CS area for RA. They basically just adjusted some of the lines to better fit with their impending plans on the preliminary plat. So in between Subdivision Committee and Planning Commission, we did not receive a new submittal of the request, but we did add some conditions of approval and some additional comments for the commission to consider. There were some questions at the Subdivision Committee meeting that were raised by some members of the public in the subdivision to the southwest about parkland dedication requirements for that associated subdivision. Those requirements were fulfilled to the city's requirements per a memo that was supplied by the Parks Division. I know that some questions have been raised at that meeting, so I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified for the commission's consideration this week. As far as anything else, they are requesting a couple block length variance and some variances to their street improvements. But with that, staff is recommending in favor of approval, and I can answer any more specific questions that you might have. We did not receive any. Yes.
Did they add, or were they proposing to add any traffic calming at the entrance to the subdivision?
Yes, so following Subdivision Committee, staff did add a recommendation for a condition of approval that some traffic calming be added at the locations where they're adding some pedestrian crossings. So one of those is between, I think it's lots 6 and 39, and another is between lots 17 and 18. So staff is recommending some traffic calming happen there, and that's a condition of approval basically of the block length variance.
Thank you.
Any further questions on that?
Does this currently just have like a right out? Like, isn't there a median there?
I believe it may be right in, right out. I actually can't recall off the top of my head. I'll have to look at it more closely.
I think I'll drive by it. Thank you.
Some of the lot lines are black and some are gray on the drawing. Is there a differentiation there?
Yes, so the lots that are gray, they're currently calling out as unbuildable because they are hoping to get a letter of map reduction approved by FEMA. They're currently within the floodplain, and so they are, so basically they're getting entitlement for those lots at this time, but they would not be able to build on them until that was removed. So I think their intention is that that would be removed at the time of final plat.
Which the neighbors will be very interested to hear.
Yeah, great question. Anything else I can answer? I did want to just get an answer on that possible right in, right out scenario. We do have we are showing that, for lack of a better term, that pork chop in the middle there to try to help ease traffic flow.
You're not able to go left out of there.
Correct.
But I think there is a cut in the median, so someone on, Rupel Road can turn left in, I believe.
Correct, yes, that is the case.
But you can't turn left going out.
Good.
Great questions. Anything else? Okay, next we have PPL 2022-06. This is a preliminary plat submitted by Crafton Toll for property located at 2390 South Dead Horse Mountain Road. The property is zoned RSF4, residential single family, 4 units per acre, and contains approximately 51.32 acres. The request is for the preliminary plat of 69 residential lots and 2 unbuildable lots. So the site plan that you've been provided is showing 2 separate phases, so the number of lots that they're requesting is just for phase 1 at this time. This is a residential subdivision. They're single-family homes. There is a bill of assurance on the property that while it is zoned RSF4, they are limited to a density of 2.5 units per acre. That was approved by City Council when the property got its original zoning entitlement. They are meeting that density requirement currently overall and with the phase 1. So they are requesting a few variances. They're requesting a variance to block length in 2 locations. There's a perimeter road that kind of jogs around that outside kind of curve, if you will, from the north to the east. And then there's a block length variance for Street 7, which is that long skinny piece you can see in the middle that reaches out to Dead Horse Mountain Road. Staff is recommending in favor of the block length variance for Street 7, that long skinny piece, but is not recommending in favor for the block length variance. The second one on the perimeter of the site, we typically support block length variances when there's a matter of topography, terrain, or other some sort of site specific reason why connectivity couldn't possibly happen. The statement that the applicant has given is that they're trying to minimize the number of stub outs to the adjacent golf club. They are currently showing 3 to the golf club property at this time. So staff is not recommending in favor. It is worth noting that staff did do some research. There was a preliminary plat approved on this site back in 2018. The applicant had requested a similar block length variance. Staff did not support that one either, but the Planning Commission ultimately did support it. So just wanted to give you that institutional knowledge in case that helped weigh into your decision making. With that, the other point of consideration here to bring to your attention is a question of an easement to to provide sewer access to the development. That easement is currently being called into question through the court system. There's some claims that the easement may have been obtained illegally or not properly, and so if the courts determine that that is the case, then the subdivision may not have adequate access to sewer. So that is slightly outside of the question for you all. This project could still receive development entitlement with that pending, but there is a condition of approval that they would have to find another option for sewer access if that easement is not something that they can use. Engineering can speak to that more specifically if you have questions today, or they can talk about that on Monday as well. Anything else I might be able to answer for you? We have not received public comment on the item, but I can answer any questions you might have. And Commissioner McGettrick, I see you've raised your hand.
So just to be clear, the pending litigation that for the sewer easement would only affect this plat approval as I'm trying to think how to say this. So it has the pending litigation has no impact on our approval except as a condition of approval should we decide to approve the preliminary plat?
Yes, I think that, yes. So if you could, yes, you could approve the plat, and if that sewer easement is deemed that, yes, it is not proper and they do not have access through that easement, that was a condition of this plat's approval, so it could effectively, I mean, they would have to find another opportunity for sewer that didn't include that easement, and that is written in as a condition of approval.
Okay, just want to make sure I understood that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to help clarify that if I can.
Got a question on Road 7, Street
Sure.
7.
Yes.
that long straight edge that's there, it seems to me like the most likely place to be developed in the future is not on the golf club side so much as that center piece that has a farm or something like that on it. Um, it is there. Does staff recommend that they do put a stub out somewhere in the middle of that long straight run?
So they physically can't. They are basically that strip is about as wide as the right-of-way dedication requirement is. So they don't really have any additional room to provide a stub out at that location, which is essentially why staff's supporting it. We are recommending that they dedicate that entire strip as right-of-way, so that if the property to the north were to eventually develop, they would actually be able to hook in then to that street in the future.
If I, Porter, we talked about this in the subdivision committee, and because it is dedicated right of way, it would belong to the city, and so at some point when connection was needed and development would happen, then it would be completely within the city's purview, is my understanding, to make any connection that was desired.
That's correct.
Thank you. That's really cool. So really, any connection in the future. So really, we're saying the whole thing could be stepped out.
Correct, yeah, I mean, we're essentially building a new street there, getting a new city street at that location, so it would function as any city street, so access could be made accordingly. Great questions. Any additional that I can help answer? Okay, moving along. The next two items are conditional use permits for short-term rentals. So the first item is CUP 2022-019. This is a conditional use permit submitted by Stay NWA for property located at 465 South Locust Avenue, Unit 6. The property is zoned MSC, Main Street Center, and contains approximately 1.3 acres. The request is to use the residence as a short-term rental. So you may recall that the city passed an ordinance about a year ago regarding the regulation of short-term rental units. As part of that ordinance, there was a pretty significant grace period extended to type 2 short-term rentals, which are typically defined as a short-term rental that is not occupied by a permanent resident. The requirement in the ordinance states that those types of short-term rentals are required to seek a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission ahead of receiving their business license. So you're going to start seeing these trickle in more frequently. So these are our first two. Staff is recommending, for this one, CUP 2022-019, staff is recommending in favor. There are a few limitations on type 2 short-term rentals that they are currently meeting as far as density. There are citywide density requirements that have to be met and building specific density requirements that have to be met. They're meeting those specific requirements in this particular case. They've got adequate parking, their trash is properly screened, and we don't anticipate this to be incompatible with its surroundings. So I can take any questions you might have about this.
They're requesting just one of the 6 units be short-term, or the whole 6?
They're, well, coincidentally, not on this meeting, but on another one, the same applicant will be requesting an additional unit in this building, but they are, with this request, requesting 1 unit to be a short-term rental. So with multifamily structures, there is typically a cap on the number of units that can be used as a short-term rental. There is an exemption for that when the property is owned by a horizontal property regime. So in that case, that 10% cap does not apply. So in a horizontal property regime, individual owners can basically all use their units as a type 2 rental. So in this particular instance, the building is a horizontal property regime, so technically all 6 of these units could be effectively short-term rentals. Any questions?
Did the city put a cap on the number of short-term rentals? I know that was discussed, but how did they finally land in the city council?
Sure. So the ordinance currently has 2 different density caps that short-term rentals have to meet. So the first is there's a citywide there's a couple considerations here. There's a citywide density cap on short-term rentals at 2% of the total number of dwelling units as defined by American Community Survey data. So that's on type 2 short-term rentals. There are some exemptions to that. The first is if the short-term rental is located within a zoning district that allows hotel and motel uses by right, it does not contribute to that count. So in this particular instance, this is MSC. So this zoning district allows hotel and motel uses by right. So any short-term rental licenses that are approved in this zoning district do not count towards that 2% cap. So they're exempt from that one. And then the other density consideration is again on a building basis. So for multifamily structures, typically there's a 10% cap of the number of short-term rentals that can be approved within a multifamily structure. There is an exemption for that when the property is under a horizontal property regime. So in particular instance, this structure is in a horizontal property regime. So technically all 6 of these units could become short-term rentals.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we always talk about the need for affordable housing, and obviously short-term rentals do in some way impact that. So thank you very much for that, bringing me up to date as it finally came through. Thanks. You do such a great job. Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this particular case? So the next one is CUP 2022-022. This is another conditional use permit submitted by Aussie Capital for property located at 229 South Gregg Avenue. The property is zoned RMF 24, residential multifamily, 24 units per acre, and contains approximately 0.56 acres. The request is to use the residence as a short-term rental. So in this particular case, this is also a horizontal property regime. So technically all of the units in this complex could be rented out as a short-term rental unit. It is not located in a zoning district that allows hotel and motel uses by right. So any of the short-term rental licenses issued in this particular case would contribute to that overall 2% density cap citywide. At this particular case, we're nowhere close right now to that 2% density cap. The applicant is showing adequate parking, adequate trash. We don't find that the use would be incompatible at this location, and we are recommending in favor. We have not received public comment on either one of these. I don't recall if I mentioned that with the first one. Again, I will give the commission an update. We do have 11 more of these in the queue currently for the commission to consider. So again, these are coming through as conditional use permits because that's how the ordinance currently reads. So just bringing that to your attention that there were also recently there were 75 permits that did not receive their business license in time. So there could potentially be quite a few of these conditional use permits coming your way in the near future.
I know this is not probably absolute something that the city tracks data-wise, but recognizing this and knowing it's right by the trail and the new Fay Jones Woods and everything, as these transition or become legal short-term rentals, is anybody generally tracking whether they have been otherwise affordable versus have they been occupied by students? I mean, do we know, are these student housing becoming short-term rental, or are these?
We don't know what the rents, if there's a question of rents or who was previously living there.
Yeah.
I'm sure there could be some in-depth analysis performed with census data and whatnot.
Yeah.
Getting block level data and whatnot to do further analysis on that. That's not something we have readily available. I don't know who the occupants previously were. Again, this is a horizontal property regime, so
yeah.
Each of the units are owned individually.
Okay, I was curious as we're thinking about affordable housing and whether we're getting so much student housing built, and so our students vacating these and going to these big complexes, and then people are like, okay, this is no longer a good student place, I'll make it a short-term rental, or is it, someone whose affordable housing is being pulled out from under them? But if they're anyway, it's convoluted.
It is a complex issue, so it'll be, so again, just bringing to the commission's consideration that this process is here, so. Any further questions? Again, we'll be seeing many more of these, so.
Yeah, question.
Oh, thank you.
Is there a process for planning commission to make a carve out for allowing this type of conditional use permit to go on consent in the future?
So right now, because they are conditional use permits, they can't be placed on the consent agenda. I don't know legally what kind of carve out could be made, because conditional use permits are discretionary approvals. I don't know whether there is any form of consent agenda opportunity. I think there is definitely opportunities for discussion about how to handle what could potentially be a large volume of these. A couple suggestions, if I may add to this, may not be the best place. If I may add a couple of suggestions, I think the commission could consider potentially a special meeting. The commission could consider, grouping these in another form, or having them all at the beginning, or however you see fit to best process them. But right now, it is not something that can be placed on consent, and I don't know whether there is some sort of bulk approval that could be done with that either. It might be more of a question for our legal department.
Is it possible that we could treat them like subdivision committee meeting?
Again, because they're conditional use permits, they have to be, conditional use permits don't go to the subdivision committee, they have to come straight to the full planning commission. It's like a rezoning, or it's like a zoning consideration, so.
And the caps that you described to us earlier, they're citywide or they're building, so they're not like at a neighborhood basis, because when we talk about compatibility, that's probably where the issue is gonna be, if people are gonna come in and say, I used to have a block full of neighbors and now I have no neighbors.
So they are not at the neighborhood level.
Right.
That was some discussion that was happening when this ordinance was first coming about, but I think at that stage, if I recall some of those conversations, it's been a couple years, that was gonna potentially be somewhat hard to track. But, yeah, this also is probably great conversation for the long-range committee. Any other questions about these two specific items? Okay, hearing none, we will move on then to our next item is RZN 2022-028. This is submitted by JS Fenwick Properties for property located at 1466 North Gregg Avenue. The property is zoned RSF4, residential single family, 4 units per acre, and contains approximately 0.43 acres. The request is to rezone the property to RI12, residential intermediate, 12 units per acre. Mr. Ryan Umberger is the planner on this one.
Thank you. The subject property is located roughly 150 feet northeast of the intersection of Gregg Avenue and Lawson Street. It's two lots on the east side of Gregg Avenue that total 0.43 acres. These properties are zoned RSF4 for residential single family, 4 units per acre. They're currently undeveloped and largely covered by tree canopy. There is a slope across the property. It runs from the east down towards Gregg Avenue on the west at a pretty consistent, roughly 15% grade, and roughly about a quarter acre of the eastern extent of the property lies within the Hilltop Overlay District. I did want to acknowledge one thing that you're probably noticing on the map there is that the shapefile that we've got doesn't exactly align with the property boundaries. We did get a new legal description submitted and reviewed by our GIS division, and it may not have been the formal review, I guess, may not have been completed through our system to update the map that you're seeing there. But generally that boundary just follows those property lines, and GIS did confirm that we've got an accurate legal to describe the properties under consideration. The request before y'all is a request to rezone the property from RSF4 to RI12, residential intermediate, 12 units per acre. We have not received any public comment on this item. Staff is recommending that the rezoning be forwarded with a recommendation of approval to the full city council, and I can stand for any questions that you have.
Ryan, it looks like on the adjacent properties, the one to the south is it RI, one is RIU and the other one is RI12? Can you generally, plain English, off the top of your head, tell me what's the difference and what's to the north and what's to the south?
Sure. So yeah, the difference between RIU and RI-12 is mostly it just comes down to I'll take a step back. The difference between those two is RI-12 limits the density to 12 units per acre. RI-12 also has bulk and area requirements that are much more significant than an RIU. So in RIU, the lots are merely required to be 18 feet wide, and there's no minimum area that they're required to be. And in RI-12, it varies based on whether you're doing like single, 2, or 3 family developments, but at its smallest, lots are required to be 50 feet wide for single and 2 family, and then for anything above that, they're required to be 90 feet wide. And then they have an incremental increase in the required lot area based on whatever the development is. I believe, and apologies because I'm kind of shifting between a couple tabs here. I think the property to the south is zoned RI-12, and the one to the north is zoned RIU. Yes, okay. Yeah, I think that's accurate.
But are they both considered, do they both have form standards or only the RIU does?
Both of them are form-based zoning districts. They have the build-to zone and the heightened design requirements associated with that.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, is the property to the south that is RI-12, is it developed as an RI-12 would be developed, or is it simply zoned that way?
The one to the south is, I believe it's just developed with 2 single-family residences on an individual lot. So it is developed to RI-12 in the sense that that's one of the permitted uses. I can't really speak to it, I guess, beyond that.
But it looks like it's not as intense as it potentially could be, whereas the one to the north looks like it's been more recently developed.
I think that's probably accurate.
And does the I stand for intermediate?
Yes.
Any further questions on that? Hearing none, we will move on then to our last item. Is RZN 2022-029. This is a rezoning submitted by Watkins, Boyer, Gray, and Curry for property located at 1678 West Palmer Place. The property is zoned RSF4, residential single family, 4 units per acre, and contains approximately 0.35 acres. The request is to rezone the property to RIU, residential intermediate urban. And Ryan is the planner on this one.
Yeah, thank you. This property is in South Fayetteville. It's situated between the University of Arkansas main campus and the south slope of Markham Hill. It is roughly a quarter mile southwest of the intersection of Center Street and Razorback Road. The property is zoned RSF4, residential single family, 4 units per acre, and it contains approximately 0.35 acres. Currently a roughly 1,300 square foot single family dwelling that was built in 1976 occupies the property. The site does have a slope to it as well. It slopes from a high point near the northwest corner down towards the southeast corner at a roughly 14% grade. There is a very, very small portion of it in the northwest corner of the site that falls within the Hilltop Overlay District, but otherwise there's no specific environmental sensitivities of significance, I guess. The applicant is requesting to rezone this property from RSF4 to RIU. Residential intermediate urban, and we have also not received any public comment on this item, and staff is recommending that it be forwarded to the full city council with a recommendation of approval.
Hey Ryan, my last dumb question, actually the real question is, what does intermediate mean in this context?
That's a good question. I was not employed with the city when those designation, like the phrasing for those designations was arrived at. I think generally though, to kind of address your specific question, is intermediate. It's intermediate in the sense of the uses that's allowed on the property. So these intermediate zoning districts, they allow anything from single family to up to 4 family dwellings. So it's kind of a middle step between purely single family residential zoning districts and multifamily residential zoning districts. And then I think the other part of that maybe is that the density limitations in these kind of is meant to address maybe some of that like missing middle housing that you hear about so often.
Thanks. That helps. Makes a little more sense to me.
Sure.
Great questions by the commission today. Do you have any others for staff at this time? Looking forward to the meeting on Monday. With that, hearing no other questions, there is a reminder, there is a long-range planning committee meeting immediately following this one. So with that, I will go ahead and officially adjourn the planning commission agenda session.